out here in the majestic Victoria Falls on the ticket of our sponsor, ICAZ. Kuzi, I think our friend is joining us. You've got a presentation lined up. So we just decided to get together and talk a little bit about the markets, which is our core competence at some level. And given that we're in Victoria Falls, maybe we can start with the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. One of the interesting things about its launch, was the broader vision, which was, the Victoria Falls being kind of like a financial hub, tax haven, along the same lines as, a Mauritius or Seychelles. Where would you put us, Kudzi, in terms of that vision, that broader vision, and where we are now?
I think we started well with obviously the VFX being sort of like being used as I could maybe, for lack of a better word, sort of like your startup, the starting point, because we already had an established market, obviously, but in local currency. Now we are bringing in the VFX with the competence that the ZSE already had in terms of having setting up a market. And but I would say it hasn't taken off as we would have wanted, especially in terms of the listings. We have got a few new ones, but most of them are counters that moved from the
ZSE
Stock Exchange. Yes, and we haven't managed to attract the ones that we would have wanted. Maybe also I thought we could use it to start the bond market in the country as well. Be that the US dollar is a steady currency, is a stable currency. So maybe we could have tried to push and have a bond market, because I think most people would agree that yeah, of course, with Zimbabwe you never know, but the policies that were put in place to try and make the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, as well as the financial service sector, different from how the normal Zimbabwean economy operates. It operates with its own rules, different rules than what we have on the ZSE. But we have already seen some changes. Remember, when it started, counters that are listed on the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, in terms of surrenders, export surrenders, they had different export surrenders than the rest of the market. But
yes,
then we changed the rules and said,
yep,
okay,
we did a bunch of
now
chopping and
applies
changing
to everyone else. And I think that's not how to do it. When you put up a policy, at least it should go. Yes, you can make changes here and there, but at least it should be a policy that everybody knows that if I want to move to this Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, this is the environment that I'm going to get maybe for the next 10, 20 years. I know one of the listed counters wanted to move from the ZSE to the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. Just before they actually issued a cautionary statement. I think Citco, they issued a cautionary statement, but just before they started the move, laws were changes on the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. So if that can be done, then I think it draws us back in terms of establishing it. Yeah.
Ranga, do you think that vision was realistic? Does the Victoria Falls have what it takes? Consider, if we made all the framework changes, could we realistically compete with the Mauritius, with the Seychelles, as an alternative financial hub, tax haven?
In my view, it was ambitious. So it came as a result of maybe trying to. I think it wasn't motivated by the desire to develop a market, and because you'd want to analyze the local market and try to understand. And I don't think the gaps that were there were crying for a creation of a sort of a financial center, as it were, because the ZSE was working. For the longest time, it has been working.
Oh, the ZSE is more than 100 years old.
Yes, yeah, it has been working. And it's very interesting because even just going back to like when we dollarized 2009, and we have been tracking the market in terms of its performance, value of trades, and also the size of the market. I remember when you're starting off, the market was valued at around 3 billion, 3.5 billion. And at that time, it was fairly bigger compared to the other markets that were just coming in. For example, the Dar es Salaam market, and also Botswana, and other markets around sub-Saharan Africa. But then when you look at the progression that we've made, the progress that we've made since then, these other markets that used to be smaller than us have actually grown in a significant way, whereas us, we have been shrinking. And it has been more a policy environment that has not been supportive of the market. So if you just look at maybe the last 20 years, but maybe the last 5, you'd find that, say, foreign participation was around 35-40%, even in the West, even in 2008. So at that point, you didn't need to create some sort of a financial center to attract foreign money into Zimbabwe. There were listed companies that were viewed by external investors as worth putting their monies into. And I think when we got into like the dollarization period, 2009-2013, foreign participation actually went all the way to 55, almost 60%, without doing it, without the creation of a new animal. So I think my reading of that was all that we needed to do was to make sure we've got an enabling environment, an environment that actually makes it attractive to have a business listed. So first and foremost, for you to have more listings, it means the market must be able to provide the capital to the businesses. So capital raising must be easy. But also after capital raising in that secondary market, I think you need some relative stability in terms of the policy environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the Victoria Falls Exchange, I think the way we then created it resulted in that cannibalization of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, because we were trying to say it was trying to sort of give an extra advantage to what was obtaining on the ZSE. In fact, at that point, the ZSE was coming under increasing pressure. The taxes, vesting periods, all the negative things that were happening, including suspension of some of the key listed businesses like Old Mutual and PPC. Mm-hmm. So what we needed was to just assure the investors about the ZSE first, and then maybe allow for the creation of another alternative market. And I think maybe I would have preferred a scenario where if this one was driven by need, as opposed to maybe regulators and policymakers just say, we have created a platform for you, go and trade there. You know?
I think I agree with what Ranga is saying, because I think what we needed to do was to say, we have run the ZSE successfully.
Yes.
It is thriving, and we can move a step further and create another vehicle which we can run successfully. But in this case, we seemed like we're running from our own shadows, from our own failures, and say, okay, let's create something. But people are saying, okay, you are the same people that have created this one and you have failed. You have self-inflicted some of the challenges that we are having.
Some of self-inflicted harm, for sure.
Yeah. So what will stop you from having
but look, you know what,
another set of self-inflicted?
I think we're on the same page in terms of how we ended up with the VFX. And for sure, it wasn't out of need, but we created it anyway, and it's there. And you know, in my view, I think that if we made an honest effort, we could potentially be competitive with a Mauritius or a Seychelles if we actually put the legal and regulatory framework in place, and you know, said, look, the Victoria Falls is going to be a special economic zone. The rules are going to be different. You know, exchange control is not going to be applicable, and made it really friendly for money to move out here. I think that would be a great experiment to run. You know, even if it ultimately failed, I think it's worth our while. You know, I don't know what your thoughts are.
So I like what Kudzi is saying, that we should have. I think the best demonstration of the potential that we're going to be unlocked by the Victoria Falls Exchange was going to come from a Zimbabwe Stock Exchange that is working very well. So we are telling them, look, we have got this market, we have got this bounce that has been there for the last 100 years. This is how it's working. Companies are able to raise capital, and the cost of trading, the cost of listing, and everything is not onerous. And there are more businesses that are actually vying to get listed on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. Maybe now let's have another platform that is going to offer something different. But what we had, we were actually coming, we had a scenario where we were destroying this other market by through some negative policies. And we didn't intend to try and maybe correct whatever mistakes that we were making with the ZSE. We thought maybe we could just leave it there and then create another market. And yet we are still in the same regulatory environment.
No, I hear you, Ranga. It's kind of like...
So my question is, was it possible to have a thriving Victoria Falls exchange at a time when the ZSE was under increasing...
but I hear what you're saying,
from the regulators.
And I understand where you're coming from. I think by analogy, I'll use land reform. It happened, and in 2002, and we are where we are today. And the question is, going forward, does it make sense to give the current occupiers of the land title, right? Will we be better off? What is the potential if we did this, in terms of being able, the farmers actually being able to raise capital and be at the cutting edge of farming, right? So the same thing applies here. Whether or not it was a great idea to set it up, in the way that we did it in October 2020, that's now past, right? Is the potential still there for us to make something of it, notwithstanding that the initial conditions and the initial motivations for setting it up were perhaps less than ideal? Could we, if we woke up tomorrow morning and decided that we want to take on Mauritius, we want to take on the Seychelles, we want this to be a major financial hub on the African continent, is that something that we can realistically pursue?
I think the potential is there, but it comes back to how we are doing it. Like we were saying earlier, say, for example, if I'm an investor and I'm coming to this new market that you have promised that it is run much better incentives and everything in between than the other markets. But a few months down the line,
we reverse that.
You reverse a few things there. So that becomes a challenge. It shows that maybe you didn't do your homework properly. Because, like I said earlier, you need to, when you start something with the framework, frameworks can be changed. I'm not saying they can't be changed, but at least when you start, have a framework that can work for 5-10 years before you change it. And also, I think what also slows it down is when people look at, Old Mutual is an international company, PPC is an international company, and somebody is looking at, okay, I want to explore listing on the VFX. These are the guys that they have a chat with to say, okay, guys, what happened with you guys? Why are you not trading? Why are your shares suspended? Why haven't you moved to this particular as suggested?
And then we don't have good answers.
And you don't have good answers. Or the guys will think, we have asked to say, what did we do wrong? Right? So that's what they will be asking, and those are the answers that they'll be getting. So we need to make the Old Mutuals, the PPCs of this world happy, so that when they respond to, when I'm going into any organization, if I know somebody, I say, okay, how is it in your organization? How do you do things? How well does your company take care of you? It's the same that happens in terms of investments. You ask others. That's why you see when Zida is going out there, when the Minister of Finance is going out there to market Zimbabwe, they go with companies that are here in Zim. And
with a good story to
like
tell.
For example, the recent one that they had in London, they had local companies that were there to tell their story, the success that they've had in Zimbabwe. I think the guys from Caledonia, Those are the guys that they go with now and say, okay, can you tell how you have experienced it in Zimbabwe? So that's the kind of that will boost the attraction to the market.
Okay, that's interesting. And speaking of international gatherings, I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about the forthcoming SADC summit. And I think, I personally I have this gripe about us on this continent. When you look at the African Union and SADC as well, and the amount of actual integration we've achieved compared to what countries in other regions have achieved, we are far, far behind. I mean, the Europeans in the 1970s came together and realized that to be competitive on the global stage, they needed to form the European Union. And I think at the turn of the millennium, they launched the euro, which has been a very successful currency to date. And when you look at SADC, if you want to work in South Africa, you need a work permit, right? If a Zambian wants to work in Botswana, they need a work permit. You've got all these different tariffs and taxes to move goods across borders that just make the cost of trade within SADC higher than it should be. It's very expensive to fly across SADC compared to flying across, Europe or, South America. Do you have high hopes for this summit, gentlemen? Do you think that it's going to achieve anything, because we've been having these summits and conferences for decades, and we don't really have anything to show for it?
So I'd say, look, my wish is for it to succeed. Yeah, that's always my wish and hope, because it's good for the region. But I think the data points are just showing us it's going to be another gathering. We are not there yet in terms of regional integration. We have got so many things that differentiate us than there are things that sort of unite us. And when you look at it, just looking at it from the SADC point of view, the size of different economies and how different countries are run or operated, I sort of understand why maybe there are certain restrictions in other countries. Because I would think there must be a minimum kind of standard for each country for it to be part of a regional bloc, so that you don't have this scenario where if you just open the borders and allow people to just carry whatever they have, look for a job in the next country, you'd have one country being pretty much everyone moving out of that country, and then you've got the population of the receiving country just ballooning overnight. So I sort of understand that maybe in as much as probably the policymakers will be happy to sort of open the borders and allow free movement of people, they're also worried about this potential of people just moving en masse from certain countries into specific countries that seem to be doing well, to a point where the economies will not be able to accommodate all of them. So probably what is needed is for all these countries in the region to achieve a certain level
But I'm going to push back.
of economic
Is that,
development.
is that true, though? Because if you look at the EU, you've got poorer countries, like some of the Eastern European countries, where you have net immigration to the richer countries. So you've got East Europeans moving to Germany, to France, to the when the UK was a member of the EU, there were a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe who worked there. And what typically happens is people immigrate not because they think a place is better, but because they believe they can get a job and work and earn an honest living. And the chances are that if when you emigrate, you work and you remit some of your income back home. So everybody wins. The market that is receiving the immigrants has all their labor requirements fulfilled, and the market that where people are leaving now benefits from it's got less idle people sitting around, and it's benefiting from the remittances. So I don't know. Look, I could be wrong, But I don't think it's necessarily the case that if you just open, if SADC were to open up its borders, you'd have people just moving without a realistic prospect of getting a job. Like, you're not just going to move for the sake of moving. You're going to move because you believe you can get a job, build a life, and send some money home, and help out your friends and relatives who also want to make the move to the greener pastures. And I think everybody's better off than having this person stuck somewhere where they're unemployed, they can't make a living, and they're just destitute.
No disposable income.
I don't know, I
Yeah.
could be wrong.
I want to take us back to the SADC Industrialization Week. I think it's the 7th one. And as you said earlier on, maybe we have had them in the past and with nothing to show. I think there's actually a SADC industrialization strategy that is there. And talking to some players in the industry, it hasn't been implemented as it should have been. And CZI, I think it's from a Zimbabwean side, CZI is leading in organizing this SADC Industrialization Week, and they've tried this time around to do some things differently. For example, they've got that investment forum, and what they've been pushing for with that investment forum is to say the investment promotion agencies in SADC region, your ZIDAs of this world, should be there. And they are calling on manufacturers now, zinc manufacturers or any other manufacturer, to say, okay, be here, and these guys, investment promotion agencies, can showcase the opportunities in their various countries and what is investors are willing to support. So you'll have all these, maybe 15, if they all come, investment promotion agencies showcasing what is in their market. So if I'm a manufacturer, I will then look at, okay, so in Zimbabwe, this is what they're showcasing. It's similar to what they have in Zambia. It's similar to what they have in Malawi. How do I set base in all of them, or do I use Zimbabwe or Malawi, something like that? So that's something that CZA is trying to do differently. Whether it will work, yeah, it depends on how they're going to package the whole thing. But they're trying to do things different from the previous one. They also have, I think, another day that they've dedicated to what they're calling the internationalization of SMEs, where they are looking at these. I think they're bringing someone from Germany, which I'm told has been very successful in pushing SMEs and making them international companies. Yeah, most of these conferences are your talk shows, but they want, with the investment promotion agencies, maybe that's where they can do it a little bit different, and it might help. I also wanted to say that the other thing, like what Ranga was saying, you risk having people from one country all moving to another country. It's because they are not doing it as a region in terms of supporting each other. That's why, if it comes to fruition, this agreement that Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Botswana wants to have in terms of the rail, it benefits all three countries. If you can put Zambia in the loop, if you can put DRC in the loop, you work together to put up a rail system. So, okay, Botswana they are going to put a new port in Botswana, and then there is a rail. In Mozambique, rather. They put a new port in Mozambique for, I think it's, Botswana wants to have coal, to export coal, I think something like that. So you're working together to say, okay, what can Zimbabwe do? In fact, the SADC industrialization strategy was actually done that way, although I heard that Zimbabwe got the the bottom of the barrel thing. But they were also saying, okay, what areas or which areas is Zimbabwe competitive in? I think the leather sector was one of them, where Zimbabwe was one of the leading guys. And then South Africa was given something, Zambia something, Botswana something. But I think what they need to do is say, okay, we said Zimbabwe, you are the leading guys in terms of let's say the leather sector. How can we support you so that you are able to feed the whole region? Botswana, you have got this. How can we support you as a region to make sure that you can feed the whole region? Otherwise, if we don't work together, then we have, with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area coming, maybe South Africa is the only one that is safe. Others will just be just getting stuck.
No, look, you raise an interesting point, and to me, what comes to my mind is that the best way to solve these problems from a top-down level, where you have a bunch of very senior people in governments sitting around a table saying, you know what, actually, from an industrialization perspective, it makes more sense for this sector to develop further in Zimbabwe and that sector to develop further in Zambia, and this shouldn't the markets be figuring this out, right? If it makes sense to build a massive leather and tanning business in Zimbabwe, right? Surely the entrepreneurs who see the gap in the market should pick that up and raise the capital and come through and build the businesses. And what the jobs of the regional governments is just to make the environment as business and investor friendly as possible. Then because what if we get it wrong? What if a port in a certain place doesn't make economic sense?
So you're actually right. So with the SADC industrialization strategy, it actually came from the SADC Business Council, the captains of industry, the so-called captains of industry, and then to the ministers, and then it was adopted. But maybe that's why it's not moving, because when you plan to do something, if then the policy maker doesn't then move things towards what you're planning as the private sector, your plans are dead in the water as well. Yeah. I just thought I could clarify on that one to say it actually came from the private sector, pushed it to the ministers, and then it was adopted by the governments. But now, whether the governments are taking that as their baby and running with it, maybe that's why the SADC industrialization strategy hasn't taken off since I think it was in 2015, if I'm not mistaken.
That's quite interesting. And then the other aspect of this that's quite that piqued my interest is the whole idea of industrialization. I think that certainly in Zimbabwe we love talking about manufacturing and industrialization and how it can be much, much bigger than it is. But the rest of the world seems to have moved on. It's all about information technology. It's all about services. It looks like they've accepted that China is pretty much the world's factory. Most things are going to be made out of there, and they're going to figure out how to create value in different ways. So I don't know. Are we in the right movie when we spend so much energy focused on manufacturing and industrialization when China's got such a massive competitive advantage in that space? I mean, can we realistically build in SADC industry and manufacturing that is world class, that can compete with the Chinese?
Yeah, so our problem is we are inward looking. So we tend to look at ourselves in a way that says we have to be self-sufficient. And it's a legacy of our history, and specifically for Zimbabwe, the Universal Declaration of Independence and the sanctions.
UDI 1965.
Yeah, UDI 1965 and the sanctions that ensured, and the thrust towards import substitution. So you are saying, okay, we have to be self-sufficient across all sectors of the economy. And I think also, even as a region, we have not gotten to a point where we think maybe let's just focus on certain areas that we might have a key competencies on, and then be able to trade with the rest of the globe for the things that we don't produce. I think if there's anything that we can learn from, like that example of China and how the world is dealing with China, is although the intellectual property is probably coming from the US, coming from Europe, the actual manufacturing of most of these products is actually happening in China. Why? Because it has got a comparative advantage in terms of being able to produce cheap labor, and also economies of scale. And also just because it's a big market, so it can absorb some of the products. So I actually think that Africa has to interrogate itself and say, what do we have in abundance? And to natural resources. So the minerals that we're always talking about, we just have to accept that it's one of the things that we have. Good weather for agriculture, to the extent that we can do it at a massive scale. That is in terms of sort of agriculture. We've got the land and all. And I actually don't agree with this thinking where people are talking of beneficiation or whatever. It's still, again, an inward kind of looking. we could actually have a relationship with China. So we know that the intellectual property is from the US. So the US contracts, US businesses contracts manufacturers in China. Manufacturers in China are looking for the raw material, which is coming from what? Africa. Let's just give them. Let's give them the raw materials. We should not really put ourselves under pressure to try and beneficiate whatever it means. Because at the end of the day, we also have to understand the value chain of these products. That you know what, you might actually process your macadamia into something, and you don't have a market, because the moment it becomes processed or whatever, it assumes certain qualities, and maybe at that point it becomes more a brand as opposed to the product itself.
Yes.
Yeah, let's look at the crocodile farms in Kariba, right? So we are selling all those skins and whatever. Someone might argue that no, we need to process the skins into something. The moment you start processing, you know, you are actually getting into the space of the likes of Hems and other top brands that you can't compete with. And I can tell you that if you put your croc skin there, and maybe it's bench size, alongside whether it's Prada or Hems or whatever, I mean, that market, you won't be competitive. Certainly, people won't pick your product. So why can't we just have so many crocodile farms in Zimbabwe? We just specialize in that. Ask ourselves that this entire Zambezi region probably is best suited for that along the Zambezi River. Maybe in addition to the farms that we have and the number of crocs that we are rearing, why can't we double them, treble, or whatever? Then we forget about processing. We do that with agriculture, even if you're exporting, you know, oranges in their raw form, whatever. It's too good. But we have got at least we have got a comparative advantage in that area. Then we attract investment in that space, and we are producing at massive scale, which is one thing that is lacking in Africa. That we continue to have this sort of cottage sort of industry, small-sized industry that look like they are specialized, but you become irrelevant in the bigger global market. Because if anything, you're just supplying a portion. Look at Kenya with their tea. So we need to have something that you say, when you send it in the global market, it's going there, occupying with a bigger market share, and it's making an impact. And then we run away from this whole idea of thinking that, no, whatever we have, let's process this into this. Look, we can process our cotton into fabric, but people are just thinking of Egyptian cotton or whatever. We can process this thing into that. Maybe there's a better processor out there. So let's just look at our comparative advantage as Africa, as the region, and be able to then supply the world with that, even if it's in its raw form.
So do you have an opinion on beneficiation?
Yeah, I do. But before I come to that, when Ranga was speaking, a thought came to my mind. There's a concept that Zimtrade is doing, where they put they go to Gokwe or whatever, and they're working in clusters. So they know Ranga can do weaving or whatever but they do clusters to say, okay, guys, you don't have scale. Work as a cluster, then you can export. But what is lacking maybe in that is to actually grow it from having a few women who are doing it, but to actually expand it and put in more money into that. And then I think it can speak to what you were saying, to say, okay, if it's crocodile skins, let's have like a whole belt of those are the clusters. But I also wanted to talk about the question that you asked, to say we are always thinking about industrialization, and when we think of industrialization, we are talking about manufacturing and nothing else. And if you also see what is coming from the innovation hubs that have been put at universities, it's manufacturing. They do your detergents, they do your beverages, and they are like, okay, we have done it. But what we are lacking is to have an environment that supports those who can innovate things, the startups. Probably we actually need a startup act to support those guys who can think outside the box, who can think about new things that do not exist at the moment. So that will help us to move away from just anyone who is thinking of a business, okay, what can I manufacture, right? So we need to support your sort of like a Silicon Valley, where people are free to experiment, they are given resources to experiment. I think that way we can then start creating other things that are not necessarily your your traditional manufacturing. You're actually coming up with completely new products, and then you can become a China or something, or the resources that we have now. Why are we not seeing people experimenting with your lithium, with your whatever resources that we have? Why don't we have the youngsters experimenting with things and coming up with completely new products? I think that's what is lacking here, an environment that supports startups and those who can innovate.
Yeah, look, I mean, I like what you bring up around startups, and this is something that is a pet passion of mine, frankly. Why is it that Silicon Valley has done so well? you know, every region, every country in the world wants to be the next country to build a Google or an Apple or an Nvidia, right? So what do you guys think is the special sauce in Silicon Valley? Because there's no place in Europe like it. China is a massive economy. They've done incredibly well over the last 30, 40 years, but they are not known for innovation. The Japanese, until the 80s, were at the cutting edge of technology and innovation, but they seem to have slowed down. And so, what do you guys think it is? Because I get people talk about innovation and startups all the time, but I don't know that we figured out how to but the gap between having the conversation and the vision and saying it's important to have startups and it's important to have innovation and actually delivering, executing. If you look at if you look at Silicon Valley's record in terms of the unicorns, which is unlisted companies with a valuation of $1 billion plus. If you look at how many patents they registered, I mean it's really mind-boggling what they've achieved. So what do you guys think it is, the special sauce there?
So I would like to talk about the issue of innovation and also the entire issue of creating intellectual property. And say, look, I think there are a number of issues that you need to consider. So one of them is the environment. So the environment must be such that it enables our creators and creatives to be able to create these things. And you know what? It's not possible in. So if you have to grapple with some very basic. Macroeconomic challenges, also, the amount of time that we spend as analysts talking about hyperinflation, talking about where the rate is, talking about where you expect the Zim dollar is going to be. It's a lot of time. We spend a lot of time doing that, and in the meantime, we actually are neglecting the actual value addition that we have to be dealing with. And so we are having to deal with some very basic, sort of primitive kind of problems that we have to solve of bread and butter nature. So even the innovation hubs that Kudzo was talking about, it's actually laughable, if not embarrassing, that we have got whole universities with complexes being built for people who are making peanut butter. And it's actually not a good product. There's no innovation in the peanut butter, But you see, if you create an environment where maybe you allow people to be creative, you don't necessarily have to have innovation hub. I can think of, I think there's one entrepreneur who got into this whole issue about, so he has got a company that manufactures natural foods, for example. I think it's Glime-Time. Yes.
Yeah, Glime-Times.
And he's doing well because you know why? He's creating something. He's actually creating a product that the market is looking at and say, okay. So he didn't need an innovation hub to achieve that. So what do you need to do for you to have 3 times, 10 times more people spending time there? I think if you create an environment that is enabling, number one, where people don't have to focus on bread and butter issues, where people are allowed to um, birth concepts. Some of them fail, or
Fail.
most of them fail, and they still have got room to start again and to start again, and also capital. So the creatives, they need to be funded, they need to be capitalized. So imagine you've got a fantastic idea. That fantastic idea, it needs someone to fund it, to take it into commercialization level, and for you to be able to, take it to the market. So in Zim, obviously, we don't have that capital. We don't have investors that are funding venture capital, that are funding innovation. And countries, for example, like Kenya, they're probably some of the countries that we can learn from.
Yeah.
It's doing very, very well from the information technology, creating of apps and whatever, because they've created that kind of environment. So I think when you're talking of that, it's more like in the hierarchy of needs, we are at the very basic level. So we are thinking of bread and butter. We are worried about our currency losing value. We are worried about the exchange rates and whether someone is able to get by. And for them, even at a household level, where you're coming from, you are sent to school and they say, you know what, I'm not going to look for a job. I want to try and experiment with this thing. In the meantime, you're not making money out of it. Even your folks will be like, you know what, wakakwana ere Brazil, But the Silicon Valley that you're talking about, you read stories about guys who started from the garage. He wasn't a poor guy. Those guys were not poor by any stretch of the imagination. So they could afford to just try whatever they're trying to do because they didn't have to worry about bread and butter issue. So they can create one company, it fails, create another, it fails, because their daily bread at that particular time is not centered on their creations. So our situation is different, but yet I like the idea that, we have got a younger population, relatively educated, going to school. Imagine if you were spending time in encouraging them to innovate and to create new ideas, and then assure them that the winning ideas are going to get funded. I think we're going to get far. But if you've got a situation where someone is going to school, they are worried about where they're going to sleep, even their food and their fees, and you're telling them, you know what, think of some idea. How do you get to think of some idea when you are worried about food, about your transport, about whether the zig in your account will still be enough for you to take you throughout the semester or the term? So those are some of the issues that we have to grapple with. So economic stability and prosperity at the basic level should be able to encourage you to think better. I was just reading the latest issue of The Economist, where they were talking about how to improve the IQ of people going forward, and they say the improvement in the IQ in the last 20 years or 30 years has been very, very significant. They're saying, is it by 2.2 points, like, is it every 10 years or something like that? And they're saying one of the reasons is because people are well fed, so there's access to food. So if you have got access to food, it means even the development of your cognitive abilities is much better than someone who has to deal with malnutrition.
Yeah,
right?
This sounds obvious. Yes.
Yes, it sounds obvious, but like you think of it, and also the fact that most children now, the number of years that people are spending in school is sort of increased. It means more people are going beyond secondary school and whatever. So those are some of the basic things that we have to achieve first before we get, because innovation, it means it requires high cognitive abilities. So we are hungry, we don't have food, we are malnourished, and we don't access to education, quality education, where children are going to school to learn new ideas and not to worry about some of the daily challenges. We are still very far away from that. So I think those are some of the issues that probably would need to think about before we start think of maybe having innovators in our shows.
Yeah, in addition to what Ranga is saying, I want to borrow from the ICAZ conference that the winter school that they're having, and the theme. I was checking my phone to try and if I can get their theme quickly, but I think it's something to do with reimagining relevance. And one of the speakers this morning, Dr. Shepard Fungura, the CEO of ZB, said something so he said that the problem that we are having, and I think that's what we are having with our innovation hubs, and some of them, Ranga, they are actually being supported by government funding. I know, for example, at CAT, all the innovations that they have started, they are still being funded by government, but one thing that, and I think we need to then change the way we think when we think of innovation, because we are thinking of a product. What product can I make? But we are not thinking of this, and this is what I'm borrowing from what Shepard was saying, to say we are not thinking of solutions. So Zimbabwe has got so many problems, but when we then go to these innovation hubs, they're saying, okay, what product can I make, right? And in most cases, it's a product that is already there in the market. So how do you make MIO and try to compete with Delta or with Jeribot? You're already beaten to the game already. But if you think of solutions, there are many problems that we are having in Zimbabwe. That, for example, right now we are talking of the new currencies, the ZIG, and we are saying it's not there, Kumbare, it's not there, Kwasia. So why are people not transacting? They are unbanked. Why not take an initiative and say, okay, from the Reserve Bank, or it funds someone to say, okay, come up with a solution. How do we get our own local currency to circulate Kumakombi easily? Why not come up with I think Stuart Bank used to have one, like a Kwenga kind of thing, where you then distribute these tape cards, and that lady who is selling tomatoes, Glenview, I can just go and tap. And it's done. When she goes to Mbare tomorrow, she just goes and taps, and you already have the current circulating, because those guys are unbanked. So you don't expect them to be holding ZIG, and yet they are not banked. How are they going?
Well,
how is it going to get to them?
I'm going to push back a little bit. I think Zimbabwe, our problem. Yes, there are some people who are not banked, but I think the last time I checked, EcoCash had more than 6 million accounts. We do have a lot of, I think to the extent that we've pursued financial inclusion, we've been very successful. I think the challenge is the reason why perhaps people don't transact as much using formal banking infrastructure and channels is because we've debased our currency twice,
Several times.
in less than 2 decades, right? So we're primarily a cash economy, because that's the one thing that people still believe in and trust, which is actual green notes. But look,
maybe just a point. What is easier to do all those? Nothing against the mobile money guys, but just the processes of just making a transaction, start this, and then you go press one and stuff, instead of just you tap and it's done.
Yeah.
You want your tomatoes is done.
For you to tap, you have to have a card, or maybe you're tapping via an app on your phone, but you have to have a bank account. So you have to actually trust the banks that if I deposit $5 US dollars, it's always going to be $5 US dollars, right? Because we've had an experience in our country, which is quite sad and traumatic, where people literally did exactly that. They deposited hard cash into their accounts, and they woke up one day and they were told, actually, you don't own any US dollars. You now own this local currency. Oh, and by the way, this local currency has got this fantastic disappearing act.
but my point,
of its value.
my point, Rufaro. Yes, I use the example of money and Z.
Yeah.
But the point is, we need guys who can come up with solutions. Look at the chaos that we have in our roads.
No.
Now we are bringing someone from Dubai to come up with systems to control traffic. Don't we have youngsters who can do that if they are properly funded and they've got the right environment?
So there's the funding aspect, but there's also the other thing. When you're talking about the EcoCash issue or mobile money issue, I remember there was a big issue with EcoCash at some point, where you could actually see that there was serious regulatory pushback to the innovation.
That's how it died.
And the pushback was not really meant to make the product better, but to actually think that maybe there's a whole plan behind just to try and cripple it. So I think the other thing that may need to be done is we need to have an environment that is supportive of the innovators. It's good to regulate them if you must, but they have to be regulated to survival and thriving, as opposed to, just putting them under pressure in a way that constrain their businesses. And to your point about whether we can't have people that can create solutions, that's another regulatory issue again, that to what extent are our policy makers comfortable with innovation that is homegrown.
Yeah, so that brings up this tension that I see all the time, which is, the three of us celebrate entrepreneurship, people who build businesses and succeed, and the sense that but on the other hand, you find that government looks at entrepreneurs in the business community with suspicion. When some of the language that you hear about profiteering, economic sabotage, right? And those accusations, for the most part, are directed at the private sector. So, and because you guys are on this side of the ledger, I want to ask you guys the question to say, have we, in the private sector, done a good job of engaging government and making them see that actually the success of the private sector, of entrepreneurs building businesses, is great for government? If you are running the government of the day, and you have lots of entrepreneurs out in the world building fantastic businesses, employing lots of people, that's actually great for government. Because sometimes when I read statements from government or listen to them talk, I get the sense that they don't believe that. They believe we are the enemy, we are the problem.
I don't know what amount of convincing is required, Faro, because the evidence is there. So almost 30 years ago, we didn't have a company called Econet. It was established, and because of that, we have got high penetration rates in terms of mobile penetration, right? Almost everyone has got a cell phone, has got access to one. So, that's evidence enough. You're just talking about how everyone has become banked because of EcoCash. This is a company that was created by an entrepreneur. I look at businesses that were not there like maybe 30 years ago. InScore would be one of them, and the other businesses that actually then sprang up from them. So we have got evidence of businesses that have been created by entrepreneurs. What we are not doing enough is to make them poster boys, to make them, like a typical. It's actually quite sad if you speak to children that are just the young men and women in our communities, the people that they look up to as business people.
The
bingers, right? But there's a whole lot of really successful people that have built proper, enduring kind of businesses. So I don't think it's an issue of just engagement, because they see that in terms of the impact that these businesses have made in society, but also tax-wise. Certainly, InScore is a big contributor to the
fiscal. So is an Econet, for sure.
So is an Econet. And the impact that businesses have made, for example, the likes of the Nyarazos and ETC. This is evidence of what entrepreneurs can do. And they're doing that in an environment which is not deliberately supporting them. Imagine what we could achieve if we had a deliberate policy to just support them. We should be having every corner, all posters, just saying, this is what Strive has done, this is what Said has done, Mataranyika has done. These are the people that we should be talking about, singing about on a daily basis because of what they've done. And they should be the inspiration to the younger generation of creatives, or people that want to venture into entrepreneurship. So I don't think it's a confidence issue, or maybe there's any engagement that is there. I would say there's a jealous aspect to it, given of the general view, the way we view things in an African context. that it's easier to control a hungry man. So the more you have these people that have got
Isn't that just a Chipinge vibe?
no, it's a Zim vibe. That's why at rallies we love to dish out chiba game and t-shirts and what That's why they can't have rallies where you guys spend your time. Like vakambo vachita rally kwa mnenge mchiro ama whiskey because they've got nothing to offer. But I actually think our policy making, our politics has to move to such a higher level where we are encouraging entrepreneurs, we are encouraging innovators, because that would mean more employment opportunities, tax revenue, a bigger tax revenue, and general prosperity for everyone. And also it's good for the politicians, because when people are really full, they're not hungry. Their minds are
They're quite happy with the status quo.
Exactly. They are most likely to be happy with the status quo when they are well fed.
I think one factor that is also affected us is that the issue of power. When you have got this guy who has done well with this company and has become powerful, they are seen as a threat to let's say to government, because they're now powerful. They can control a lot of things with their power. But I think the only way of making sure that there's no one who is so powerful that millions of people depend on them is to then create an environment
where there are lots of them.
Right? We saw it. What happened with? I would call it, maybe for lack of a better way of describing it, a blessing in disguise, when regulatory challenges affected EcoCash. But how many now similar products have come into that space? So, but from the word go, we should create an environment where all these new startups, new ventures are creeping up, so that we don't end up with one powerful one. Because if we have a few powerful ones, then they become a threat one way or the other.
Why are the likes of Elon Musk not a threat? Or maybe they are. I don't know. You understand?
Look,
They are, but
I don't have a problem with natural or organic monopolies. So if you look at, so if you look at a company like Amazon, right? It's the biggest e-commerce business in the world, but they're focused on making prices cheaper, right? So the customer is actually better off because Amazon exists and is incredibly competitive. Do you think that you are worse off because Google has 95% plus market share? I think most people love, to Google things, and they find their experience with Google enriches their lives, even though there isn't really any viable competition. But they didn't get there because they had improper practices. They got there through excellence and consistencies. So look, I hear what you're saying, but I think, and to the extent that a company actually builds such a monopoly, it's not guaranteed that will always be the case, that they will always enjoy such market share, because what can happen, and like we've actually seen this in the cell phone business, where I remember, I think before BlackBerry, there was Motorola that was all the rage, and then Nokia came in, and they completely dominated the market. And I remember, the guy who was running Microsoft at the time, Steve Ballmer, in 2007, when Apple launched the iPhone, he thought that this thing was gonna fall flat on its face and fail. And it's a famous quote. And then Apple became really dominant, and people thought, they've run away with it. And then Samsung and Android came up, and so I think even if you are totally dominant today, it's if you're in business, which is the difference between business and politics, is you're not guaranteed to be dominant indefinitely. But yeah,
but you know why? Because the policies that are there, are the environment also that is there is an environment that can nurture others to say, okay, I can beat this particular one to this game. I can do
Absolutely.
it better. You see, that's the environment. That's the difference with maybe with our own environment. That it doesn't then allow. You can only have one or two people who can then run away with it, but the rest you can't. The environment is just not there. Like what Ranga was saying earlier on, you've got a guy we've got about what, according to statistics from Zimstat, we've got about 2.5 million youth between 15 and 34 who are not at work, not in school, not in any training. So this guy
Wow.
is
That's
is
concerning.
just sitting idle at a bridge somewhere and just doing whatever they are doing. But these are the guys that, if, for example, if we had an economy that supports them from a family point of family level, where they are not worried to say, my mother or my father is going to ask me, what are you bringing to the table? When are you bringing the next meal? It's also time for you to contribute to your own. But this guy is just thinking, what can I create? I can create something. You know, we don't have that kind of environment. That's why we have got a few guys we can say. There is, yes, in the world, of course, we have got the Bezos and the what. Yes, it's there. They are prominent people. The Elon Musk of this world, they are there. And just like in Zimbabwe, you've got your Elon Musk, but that doesn't stop others from going into almost a similar space and find a small market share that they can actually do well on. Yeah, that's the difference.
No, fantastic. It's been good, guys. The producers jumping up and down. I think we've hit more than an hour. So Ranga, I'll give you the last word. I'm just going to say cheers to ICAZ and Pilsner. But I'll give you the last word. Yeah, well, there's nothing in there.
Yeah, well, once again, we have got a fantastic opportunity given the younger population that we have. They just need to be supported. And the role of the policymaker is just make sure that there's an enabling environment. And I would say we want these successful entrepreneurs to be given their due recognition, and so that our children would have proper role models. Those who want to go into entrepreneurship must be able to know who are the leading entrepreneurs, not just globally, but also locally. And then, yeah, we support our own. And also, obviously, when it comes to the whole regional issue that we've spoken about, that it's better to be integrated than to be segregated. And we can actually achieve more if we are to work together. And I guess conferences like the ones that this one we are attending, the ICAZ summer winter school rather, I think they should not just be talk shop, but platforms for people to actually strategize. And on an annual basis, they must be, we should be able to ask ourselves, what is it that we set out to do last year, and what have you achieved? And should be able to contribute even into the policy positions that are going to be there for the rest of, for the whole economy.
Okay, fantastic. On that note, guys, cheers.
Cheers.